Well, what was so weird about the whole thing was that I could hear you just fine. So I heard you doing the phenomenons. I heard you doing the whole thing. I could hear you all just fine. And you're like, "Oh, Guy froze." And I'm like, "No, I'm here. I'm here." Guy
Yeah, we
froze.
couldn't
So I
hear
started
you at
going
all.
and like making
No,
faces.
so there was like one point where like you basically like were only pupils, like the blue in your eyes were completely gone, and it was just like pupils. And so I'm like, Guy looks like he was body snatched.
Wow, that was. But what was so weird was like I was texting you over here on. I mean,
And
it's
I was
on
like,
this
basically,
monitor.
I'm still talking to Guy, folks. Like,
Yeah, I'm like, I don't get it. That was so weird. And now we're doing a completely different show, which really we should just wrap up. But I
yeah,
did want to at least. Oh, Brent's back.
yay.
I did want to ask you. We went through this whole discussion about AIs and did a lot of development on AIs, but you wanted to share something, and you were like, "Oh, wait until after you." And then I'm like, "Ha ha ha!" Little did you know that we would just drop this whole show and stuff. That looks black,
It looks black,
but
but
it's really.
dark blue.
Oh, I like that. Yeah.
So this is the Mayan pigment that I
That
special
Raph
ordered
wants?
for someone basically requesting me to make paint for them.
That never happens.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. Actually, they saw that I did a custom paint for you, and that's where it sparked from.
Yep.
So
Mine blue.
Mayan blue. This one is it's one of the few times where I will go back to using honey for, because
Yeah.
Mayan pigments specifically, you can use corn syrup, but they crack easier. This is one of those chalky like pigments, basically, and it gets everywhere. And when I say everywhere, I mean everywhere.
You're like, I'm still washing it out of my ears. Gotcha.
Yeah, like I had to wash my desk like twice and stuff, and I still am finding like little tiny particles.
Right.
In which case, originally I was gonna make more for Watercolor Wednesday, but I tested, and this is still wet.
And it's been like 6 days.
No, not too long, not too much. I'm doing this in layers, so like this layer is still wet. Like there's
Right.
one underneath that's a slightly drier, you know. But when you're paint making and you see a crack or something like that with the Mayan pigments, at least what happens is you can fill in the crack with another layer, and eventually it stops cracking. But like that's with the use of honey, because it makes it stick to oneself, I guess.
Okay,
anyways,
that makes sense.
The bowl I'm working with was provided by the person who requested the paint, so that's why it's in this specialized bowl.
That's
It's
very
not
special.
something anything. Yeah. I did go on, like I wasn't sure like how far you went with me talking in the previous video. I am actually on page 6 of the 6-page comic for the anthology.
Oh, good.
I actually got a lot done,
Mm-hmm.
and I actually even interjected 2 commercial breaks. And I want to come up with the commercial breaks, because I kind of want to like tell you the commercial breaks, not anything else about the story. So
Fair.
one commercial break is a 2-panel split for commercial for something called Sassio's, the Sasquatch cereal.
I like it.
And then you have the commercial for the Fresno Nightcrawler leggings.
Okay.
So Fresno nightcrawlers, for those of you that know cryptids, are basically legs walking around with eyeballs on top. So here's the head, and then here's legs.
That's
So
awesome.
basically, I'm thinking like the commercial break is like just basically like a billboard where it's like Fresno Nightcrawler leggings for your ultimate comfort. And then, like, you just see a picture of like a Fresno Nightcrawler like being all sexy, but it's, you have to remember, it's all legs,
Right.
literally.
That's awesome. What kills me every time is like the concepts that these guys come up with. I mean, they think these things, somebody thought that out somewhere. Either they saw it in their window,
No,
or
I've actually, you can look up Fresno Nightcrawlers and you can actually find like people like have pictures of these things that are walking across. And they really do look like beings
right,
that are just nothing but leg.
right.
They're funny and they're fascinating, but like do I think that they exist? I have no idea. I have no
Right.
idea.
Well, neither do
Like
I.
I like that.
But it's still kind of a thought process. It's like, huh.
I mean, I like the theoretics of cryptids. I just don't necessarily believe that all of them are true.
Right.
So, but Sasquatch and Bigfoot and Skunk Ape and like pretty much every single known version of, that genre of cryptid. There's so many variations of them because, everyone's missing the link.
Sure.
Dad joke for the week.
Missing link. I get it.
A very bad dad joke, but I'm practicing.
Those are the best. So that's cool. I had wondered, how much we would have possibly gotten done in 3 days. Clearly, I have opened a door on my side that I didn't know I needed to open. So that's good.
Well, and then you were talking to a person who's married to a person who does programming,
right? Which helped a whole lot.
Yeah, and the thing is when he talks to me about it, he's like super excited and everything like that. But like I'm like, okay. So I mean, I understand the principles and stuff like that. Like, but as far as like a world building thing, I don't necessarily know enough to basically be like, oh, I'm an expert at it. Like I know enough to go, okay, that's different than what you said yesterday, Bill.
Right. Well, and Bill brings up an interesting sort of concept point, which is we still have that jump between our brains being nothing more than a calculator, but somehow has sentience.
Yeah.
And somewhere we're going to have to take these calculators and they're going to have to also make that jump. So between that gap right there, between calculator and sentient calculator, there is this, what programming did you cut into that chip that made it gain sentience? When a chip comes alive, if you didn't write anything out in the cerebellum, let's say, that part, the upper part of the brain, then the chip can just like read and write, and that's all. It's got basic DOS on it, and that's all it has, right? Well, so is that enough to survive, or does it just die at that point in time? Does it gain sentience by just existing? These are the questions you kind of have to ask.
You could have like the original, like you
Bill's
could have
back, I gotta say something. Says Bill.
But before he starts talking,
wait, you gotta finish your thing. Then finish your thing.
I think like the original 13, like you could have like the whatever happened that created them. It could be like on some Windows 10. Brent. Right.
They're all running Windows 10.
You could sit there and have them like in like a kind of a thing where like after they pass the chips where like they're on display so people can see them, like other AIs can see them, but like they're in a museum like if humans like or living people like flesh and blood people tried to view them, the AIs are like no,
right,
like no, you are not allowed to do that because basically like the chips are on display in the area or near the area where they have to form them for a new one. So you could actually
though I see where that's coming from. What if it wasn't? What if you went to the Museum of Natural History and there's like a Cro-Magnon and then the AI chip and then a Tyrannosaurus Rex and they just stick it in there with the rest of the stuff at the Museum of Natural History?
Yeah.
Wouldn't that be weird?
Yeah.
Because then you're like, huh.
But then like somewhere on those chips, even though that they can't take a life form anymore, you could have it where one of the AIs basically finds out, no, there's something on those chips about the origins.
Right.
And that's when you can develop the origin there. Like what I'm saying is basically you can put it on the wayside on the back burner for right now. And until you come up with a viable thing, you can just tie it in by basically someone going over to one of the chips and plugging it in somewhere. And like you find out, they weren't created to have their own planet. Like they weren't created to have a sentience at all. Something affected them, but they're not even sure.
Right.
So
right.
I'm sorry.
Bill was trying to say something. What were you going to say, Bill?
So for how they reach sentience. So to preface, AI in the world that we are in and how we use it to like sharpen images or increase resolution, etc. That is not AI like what you're talking about. There's this conflation of stuff in the world right now.
There's this line and there's this line. We've got to make that hop. Yeah.
Yeah, and AI today is not going to take over the world. It's something very different. So that being said, the way AI works is typically they always talk about neural networks because there's this branching logic, and it will branch out like 64, 120, however many times you want to branch out to try different iterations of stuff, and in that way you run it through a batch process where it learns. It tries and tries and tries until it gets a successful result. And then that's the one it'll continue to use. So in a way, that's the kind of way our brain works in a neural network. It tries different connections until it gets one to work. And in the way we don't know how we have sentience in the connection our calculator has would be the same mysterious way that AI in your world would have sentience, in that it branched out, it found the connections, and it's sentient.
Right. So what I think would have to happen is your parents would write like the inner ring, and then the outer ring would have to be its own Darwinistic structure where it just keeps trying and trying and trying until it gets the right answer on that outer ring.
Yeah.
And I think that's, I've been thinking about this. I think that what happens is, the core DOS is in the center. Then there's a ring that your parents etch. And then the remainder of the platter is you learning until that platter is burned in. And maybe what happens is the platter can only burn and reburn a certain number of times. So that's where you're dead. At some point in time, it etches so many times over the same part of the platter that it can't etch anymore. And then there's no more etching, and then parts of your brain start to die. And that's when an AI gets old and starts to die because it can't remember as much anymore, gets stayed. It doesn't evolve as much. It can't keep up with the new young whippersnappers and stuff like that. You can tell it's because whatever is that platter is made out of
Mhm.
can't be etched anymore. So that the logic that Bill's talking about, where he's talking about having to branch and create a new thing, it physically existed somewhere where that question was answered, and then it wiped out and erased the old branch, the one that failed.
Mhm.
And so in doing so, though, it had to go through and scribble on the platter, so to speak, like a hard drive,
Yeah.
and like scribble on it to erase it. And at some point, there's just not enough layer left for it to etch in that area anymore, and it becomes a dead area. So
Until you end up getting cascading failures. And
yeah, you start getting cascading failures. The positronic matrix depolarizes, and
You
then
melt into a
you have
puddle of
lol. And yet the Trekkies continue to go on and Trekkie. But I mean, that's sort of like a logic that can make sense. And I kind of like that because there's a physicality to it. It also makes sense as to why you can't really back up these brains.
Anyway, I just want to be rude. I have to go back to work. Sorry.
Yeah, I know. This is a great discussion to include you in. I'm sorry, Bill.
Well, yeah.
This is exactly what he needs to be talking about. I mean, I totally get that.
Yeah. His job can wait. It's all
right. This is, well, it's like all the things that he's into too. I mean,
Yeah.
it totally is like his cup of tea. It's right in his wheelhouse. Right. The AI
gets dementia.
Just schedule a Zoom get together and we'll talk.
Right. That's what we need to do. We need to start hanging out.
Yeah.
Just a brainstorming session.
Right.
Yeah. Honestly,
just not in the middle of work.
Like honestly, when Brent is saying AI gets dementia, like, are we talking just like they just have a slow breakdown of their memory until they have none and then they pass away, which is what a lot of people think? Or is it like the dementia that I had to witness where not only did they break down, their memories break down, but they regressed in age?
Mm-hmm.
Like,
and if you think about that, we have a platter.
Mm-hmm.
In the center of the platter is the core OS.
Mm-hmm.
That doesn't ever get rewritten. It's the 5 commands that you need to live. Eat, poop, sleep, breathe.
Yep.
Right? It doesn't have much more than that.
Mm-hmm.
Then around that outer ring is what your parents programmed in, which gives sort of the starting points for all of these branches of thought and stuff like that. That stuff can be rewritten, but it's difficult to rewrite. Most people don't, or whatever. And then you have this platter, this open area out here where the person lives. This is where all those decisions are being made, and it's rewriting all the time. That area up there starts to degrade at some point. And when it does, you can't rewrite anymore, and you would be effectively regressing.
Yeah.
Because you'd be coming back down as there's no more room up there on that platter to write in anymore. So you'd be coming back down to being a kid again because you'd be stuck with your parents' memory area. And that's the only place you'd be. So at some point, it would be like you were a child.
Yeah.
I think that's actually exactly what would happen.
And then you have like the other incidences where the AI is like at work or something in the engine room or something. Everyone's typically asleep and they're having like their quote unquote me time, right? Like no living beings are around them and they're relaxing. And you can have an incident where Chang and the crew are investigating an AI murder. And they basically what you see is someone took like a laser type situation or a laser tool and just basically went straight across the disk completely.
Right.
And you have like a fractal, decomposing fractal AI like in the center of the room that you can't even move.
Right.
It's stuck there. It's, and
I do have in this first scene, Chang hugs the hologram. So clearly these holograms can have physicality.
Yeah, but
So
if you damage the disc enough, do they still have physicality?
Right. What would happen if your AI gets locked right there, standing in the middle of the room, just and it's stuck there, and now everybody can't walk through? Like he's walking through the door and gets stuck right in the door.
Right.
Now, what do? You're going to have to somehow. I mean, you're going to have to physically dismantle the spacecraft's hologram generators in order to make that stop.
Mm-hmm.
And there's a lot of interesting problems that could occur with this.
Yeah, like maybe for whatever reason, a corporeal or a non-AI was vying for the job for some weird reason, and just decided take you out, but didn't realize the problems that would occur if they killed him.
Well, and if nothing else, that is definitely a viable story. What do you do if you have a stray bullet strike the ship's AI, and damage the platter? Then you've got an AI who is mentally corrupted and still in charge of making sure that the coffee gets made every morning. And I don't know if I'd trust the coffee at that point. You know what I mean?
Well, yeah. Another thing,
and you don't do it like you wouldn't want to play it like they would play it in today's modern sci-fi. You play it differently. Like the AI is like, don't drink the coffee. I'm not sure if I made it right. And then you really feel bad because you're like, dude, is there anything we can do to help you? And it's like, then it hurts as opposed to just, ha ha ha, I'm the evil AI. I've purposely screwed up the engines,
Yeah.
You play it differently. You play it with, I'm not sure I'm qualified to fly the ship anymore, and stuff like that. And that's a different story. And that's a more personal story. And it hurts a lot more.
And what I'm talking about is what I'm talking about, and I just want to clarify, I'm saying someone etch through the core.
Right. Like intentionally burned into the platter.
And basically they're not even functional.
Right. And
the cascading effects that happen on a ship, because maybe the stuff can hold for a little bit, but the automatic stuff would be gone.
Right. Elevators, so you're saying take out that little core piece in the center that's the IO part.
Yeah.
Now the AI just lives in his own brain. It'd be effectively like Stephen Hawking.
Yeah. And essentially whoever had did it didn't realize the consequences,
Right. Or it could just be a disease.
It could, yeah.
I mean, somehow the IO readers accidentally, instead of etching out on the cerebellum part of the brain, it accidentally etches into the spinal cord by accident. And it's just a glitch in the system. And it's a disease that they get. Mm-hmm. It's a programming bug. Oh, that's interesting. Like a virus, a programming bug. And if you catch this bug, this virus, then it etches into your core memory instead of etching out onto the cerebellum memory.
And you can have the race that doesn't like a
Brent's on the same wavelength.
Yeah. You have a race that I believe that doesn't like technology and stuff like that very much, don't you? In this world?
I'm sure we've got
you could actually have a whole entire section of it that basically dedicated their lives to get rid of AI.
Yeah, I think that's the plot of Picard.
Yeah, that pretty much is. Yeah, but I don't know how season 2 is gonna go yet because I haven't watched it. I've watched the first season. I just haven't.
Well, there isn't a season 2 of Picard yet.
Yeah,
season 2 of Picard comes out next year.
Because John Clancy and Whoopi Goldberg are returning as their characters.
Yep, that's gonna be awesome. But yeah, I mean, now, I definitely don't want to take it into the realm of intentional bad guys unless I have to. I like to do man versus environment stories as opposed to man versus man stories. That doesn't mean that I won't. It just
Yeah.
I
But
think
what I
it'd be
was
more
describing-
fascinating to have
Yeah.
a virus that they've got to stop, you know?
What I was describing was basically it is environmental because you have people who don't want this in their environment.
Yep.
And they purposely wrote a virus or something that causes that to happen.
Right.
And so basically to test it out, like you have to test it out somehow. So how
Yeah.
did they decide that? Like shoot a gun and then the virus is injected into the ship.
Right.
And then it slowly works its way. So they can't even pinpoint when it happened.
Right.
You know? So it's one of those things of you have a lot of ways that you can do it.
I think we run into all kinds of potential problems the moment you have an environment and world where everything interacts all the time and all of the data is potentially being rewritten in waves. Like the internet right now runs on a whole bunch of stuff that's constantly being rewritten and altered and changed and moved around. The data is flowing and it's in a flowing environment. And I think that if you have creatures that effectively live in this environment where they risk being rewritten in the process, that's a big, I think you'd have insane firewalls that would be like, impossible to crack because the AIs would generate a firewall faster than a human could type letters to break the firewall down or anything like that. I think there'd be like pets that would exist in there too. I'm throwing a couple of dogs at their firewall, and the dogs are effectively mini AIs that aren't as intelligent or aren't sentient, but their job is to calculate the numbers to break down firewalls. So I think you'd end up with all kinds of interesting Ghost in the Shell-esque environment out there.
Yeah.
You'd be fighting in. And I think what would happen is after a few years or a few hundred years, there would be a certain set of rules that would be established and enforced. So you'd have effectively AIs that were cops. That's what they do. Mm-hmm. I found out that Bill the AI was making dogs to try to chew down firewalls. So we had to arrest Bill the AI, And so we locked Bill the AI in a prison for 400,000 microseconds, which, now he's completely reformed because that was a very long time for him to sit there.
I was just in my youth.
It's what you get, Bill. I told you not to do that.
Bill has one more thing to say, and then we definitely have to go because he has a meeting soon.
Yep, we should wrap it up.
So 2 points. One about the backing up situation. So there's a thing in IT now where we don't typically try to back everything up, all of our snapshots and differential backups. So we don't back up everything. We just back up all the things that changed from one point in time to another point in time. So that might be something they could do that wouldn't require creating a whole nother AI chip to store, because they could store little chunks of their time as a backup. And then they could use that if they were damaged to reform their memories that were lost or functions that were lost.
And really, honestly, if you think of things operating in a random world, you could just save the seed, the seed number.
Yeah.
And then you'd still be able to reproduce the pattern out there.
Yeah.
But I would like to think that, first of all, I think that it's important as an author that the AIs have a mortality. They have a certain amount of mortality.
I have a second point on that too. So
you've got another point to that. But yeah, so I agree with you to some degree, but I think that anytime you backed yourself up, you'd come out a different person.
Mm-hmm.
You might be Bill, but it'd be like Thomas Riker. That'd be, in fact, exactly what happened.
Well, with a differential backup, you're just repairing that moment in time that the snapshot was.
Right.
And that would be what was put back into place. So if it was from January 1st, 2021 to the end of January 2021, that's what would be repaired if you use that particular snapshot.
Sure.
So
well, you can
that
also
would be
do like
if they got a
RAID
virus
servers, which
or
the
something.
RAID servers do the same kind of thing where they share enough information. If one of the hard drives crashes, then you just pull the hard drive and put another hard drive in. And after about an hour or two, it's healed up the data.
Mhm.
So in the same manner, I'm sure that minor damage could probably be repaired. So you'd have, oh, sorry, I'm sick. I'll have to be in the hospital for a day or two while RAID server sort of fixes the hole that has shown up.
Mhm.
But I think that would be get to a certain point where there's enough damage that there's away.
Yeah, I think, well, that in combination with there's only so much space to store things, I think AIs would pick certain snapshots that were valuable and important to them, and those would be the ones they keep, where mundane days, they would just be like, that nothing important that day happened, I don't care about it.
Right.
Yeah.
It's been
And
flushed.
so the second point is, because you kept talking about discs and scribing, and I'm like, that just feels like kind of like retro for the future. But what I was thinking is, what if they scribed a special kind of metal, and that was the seed, and then they dropped that hard metal that's kind of like a chip into a kind of like a mercury kind of liquid metal that over time, as they grow, hardens to that chip and forms those new networks. And
Right.
as they get older, they run out of that liquid, and it's rare, so they just can't have a ton of it.
Right.
And eventually
Well,
it just hardens up until it can't really, it doesn't have mental plasticity, as they say, and then eventually breaks down, and they die.
maybe even if you were to drain all of the mercury out, it would kind of look like those people who used to pour like aluminum into ant hills
Mhm.
and then wash away all the dirt, and you end up with kind of patterns that look like that. So if you were to drain all the mercury out, you'd have kind of this, you could see this pattern, a network of hardened veins, so to speak.
Yeah.
That would be kind of cool.
Mhm.
Yeah, I agree. That's good. Yeah, I was just using the scribe analogy because I figured that was a good way to think of it. Now I'll come up with how the physicality, because I'm going to have to. It's a comic book, so I'm going to have the physicality someday, somewhere along the line.
Mhm.
They're going to open the suitcase someday.
You know, I don't know why this interests my mind, but if there's someone out there that hates AIs, I feel like they would have those anthill things as trophies because they go out and murder them. That would be like a creepy kind of storyline.
That'd be kind of creepy and awesome in its own way. I like it. Cool.
And you can also, like, as they're traveling, all of a sudden they just come up upon like a giant structure that is nothing but a single one, and you're like, what created this?
Right.
Well, I think that's the point too, is it's a very rare kind of metal, so that
it's got to be something rare. And I actually was thinking it's not just that the metal is rare, but the interaction causes it to either change states or change something happen so that it's not 100% clear. It can't be reproduced. It only happens in the chemical world of this brain. So it's just normal mercury out there. But once the brain itself does its thing, the mercury turns into titanium. It turns into something completely different.
Yeah, some kind of max capacity that just scientifically has to be a certain size.
You hit a point where the titanium then changes and turns back into mercury. And there's nothing you can do about it. It just at some point loses its titanium value and just turns back into mercury. There's nothing you can do, but it's kind of like, because that's what happens with human cells. When we die, all of these things that are connected to each other just fall apart. And I'm not even really sure how it knows it's supposed to fall apart. All these things are connected, but you dig up a human body and it's goo. You know, it's like, and it turns goo really quick. Like pieces of our body, it's not just interaction with bacterium and things like that. There's something that lets go when you die. You know, something happens, just says, "Oh, okay, well, we're dead now." You know, you get rigor mortis, your muscle locked up, and then they go. Reasons that don't make sense. So,
Yep. Bill has to go to work, and in 10 minutes he's starting a thing. So, well, I'm going to just say goodbye for now. I think Guy froze again. It's been nice and lovely talking to you, Brent. It's been great talking to everyone who's chimed in. I think Guy may be trying to talk to me in another way. Nope. Let me see. I'm just going to say goodbye. In private chat for Guy, because I don't know if he can hear me, but I can't hear him. And I guess for everyone who can't hear Guy, keep your eyes on the stars.